Hello for the 25th Sunday in Ordinary Time, using the first reading Amos 8, 4 to 17, and the Gospel Luke 16, 1 to 13. And there's a lot of words in this Gospel that are hard to understand, not just God, but mammon, measure, and cores. If we understand those words, maybe we go understand the gospel. I don't know. But at any rate, I think God is not a difficulty, but God's a mystery and it is not totally understandable. I'm reading a book right now. It's called The Essential Path. And in chapter 11, it talks about the history of the word God. And this author, Neil Walsh, he said somebody sent him a list of the names of God, and guess how many were on, how many gods there are, or the God list. Not complete, but there's listed in this book here 223 names for God. And I read them all, and I recognize pretty much 42 of them. 223 names for God. Well, to how to understand God. Then Mammon. Mammon's another name. Every time I read this, you can't serve both God and Mammon. I always try, look up Mammon. Well, I did again. And I found out, once again, Mammon is a Arabic word, and it means prosperity or wealth. And Jesus uses this term mammon in a negative connotation, meaning that riches and wealth can lead to a lot of bad things. So God is saying, and Jesus is saying, who is God? You can't serve both ultimately. If you compare where you're supposed to give your respect or your service or your allegiance is to God and not just wealth and prosperity. So he winds up the gospel with that. You cannot serve both God and mammon. And so this example, I think, is interesting. And he then gives the example of the unjust steward. And the unjust steward is a cheat. And he's a cheat sort of in big things or maybe smaller things. Well, the steward is going to be fired. So he goes out to his master's debtors that people owe. And one is 100 measures of olive oil. Well, what's 100 measures of olive oil? It all depends where you look. Because I looked all over the place, and here's my final bottom line. Either it's about 350 gallons of olive oil or 35 gallons of olive oil. And then there's 100 cores of wheat. And even it's either something like 1,250 bushels of wheat or 125 bushels of wheat. At any rate, the point of it is a lot of wheat and a lot of olive oil. And Jesus seems to always exaggerate. Remember when he talked about, in your eye, taking and looking in the splinter in the other person's eye? And he says, well, get to your eye first and pull out the beam, not a splinter, but the beam. He seems to exaggerate. So I like to go with the 350 gallons of olive oil and the 1,250 bushels of wheat. But at any rate, the clever, evil steward goes to the people, the debtors, and says, well, you owe 100 here, write 50. If you owe 100 here of the wheat, well, we'll change the bill and write 80. Then Jesus says, you know what? The people of the world, children of the world, seem to be more clever than the children of light or the children of religion. And that's worthwhile thinking about. Evil people are clever, and it's still around, isn't it? Something like this, sort of, as wealthy parents trying to get their kids into the university or to college have given hundreds of thousands of dollars or $1 million to the university if you accept my daughter or my son. Or if you get somebody to cheat and change the records of their entrance test, and so that he or she, my son or daughter, gets into Stanford. People of the world are clever, but even they often get caught. And then Jesus comes and talks about, are you going to be honest in small things or honest in all things, big things? Well, I think you and I, and we're not just these great big evil people out there, but I think we have to zero in on small things and not dishonest in small things. Because Jesus said, if you're honest in small things, you'll be honest in big things. I think that's what Jesus is saying. The ultimate is your service to God. And if you serve God in small things, you'll also serve God in big things. Purity of heart. Jesus, once again, giving one of those examples in a parable. If you refer back to the first reading from the book of Amos, it's taking the wealthy, the clever, the people of the world, and they're changing the scales. The scales that weighs the wheat, or the machine that pumps the gasoline. Let's change it where they get not quite a gallon for their price, but 4/5 of a gallon. We could make a lot more money. They'll never know. Clever. Jesus says, I want you totally. I want you in small things and in big things. And he winds up the whole parable with, you can't serve two masters, God and Mammon. Have a good day.